Here we are.
All right, welcome everybody. Good morning.
Morning.
Before we begin, I'd like to let everyone know that a live transcript can be opened in a new tab by clicking the transcript button in the top left corner. So let us begin by acknowledging the traditional stewards of the lands we are all standing on. We show gratitude to the Tongva people, past and present, for caring for this place that was stolen from them and that we now call Los Angeles, but was first Yangna. Today, let us also remember Tongva tribal elder Julia Bogani, a great Tongva leader who passed last month. I invite you to acknowledge the ancestral people of the land you are currently on by sharing their names in the chat and to consider what actions you can take to help Indigenous people gain autonomy today. Welcome to Women Who Submit Literary Submission Workshop and Orientation. We begin today's program with Curating and Placing a Chapbook. I'm Lauren Eggert-Crow, a member of the Women Who Submit leadership team and your technical support for the day. If you are having any technical issues or need clarification, you can message me directly in the chat. In a moment, I will hand it off to our panel moderator, Lisa Cheby, but first, some reminders. This event will be recorded and can be found later on YouTube. Please check that you are muted and keep yourself muted throughout the program. There will be time in the last 10 to 15 minutes for questions from the audience. And to ask a question, raise your hand or use the raised hand emoji and wait to be called. Remember again that a live transcript can be opened in a new tab by clicking the transcript button in the left corner. Following today's panel at approximately 11 a.m. Pacific time, new members will be moved into a breakout room for a new member orientation with Sakaya Manning. This space will be for a Women Who Submit submission party facilitated by Sibel Garcia Cole. And this Zoom will remain open for co-working until 1 p.m. And now I pass it on to Lisa Cheby.
Thank you, Lauren. Thanks for being our tech host today and welcoming everybody. I'm very excited to see so many familiar faces and some new ones today. It's been a while since I've been to the Saturday check-ins, so good to see all of you, and welcome to those who are here for the first time with Women Who Submit. So I am super excited today to talk to two poets who recently had chapbooks come out. Janise Miller's, let me grab it there, The Blvd, and Lineage of Rain by Janelle Pineda. So I want to just take a moment to introduce both of them, and then we're going to talk about one of my sort of favorite topics around poetry, chapbooks. I think they're a really exciting form, and I'm excited to learn more from our panelists today. So Janelle Pineda is a Los Angeles-born Salvadorian poet, educator, and the author of Lineage of Rain. A first-generation college graduate, she earned a BA in English from Dickinson College, where she was a Posse Scholar. Pineda has performed her poetry internationally in both English and Spanish, and has been published in LitHub Pink, The Breakbeat Poets, Volume 4, Latinx, and The Wandering Song, Central American Writing in the US, among others. She is part of the editorial team that founded La Piscucha, magazine, a multilingual arts, literature, and cultural magazine created by Salvadorian writers. Since her involvement in the 2018 Radical Roots delegation, Pineda is also a member of the Committee in Solidarity with the People of El Salvador. She holds an MA in Creative Writing and Education from Goldsmith University of London as a Marshall Scholar. So welcome, Janelle. And our second panelist today is Jenise Miller, a writer and poet and urban planner based in Compton. She is a 2021 PEN Emerging Voices Fellow and VONA Voices alumna. Her writing about art, local history, and growing up Black Latinx in Compton and Los Angeles is featured in her poetry chapbook, The Blvd, as well as in the Los Angeles Times, LA Review of Books, KCET Artbound, Boom, California, Dryland Literary Journal, and the Acentos Review. And congratulations to Jenise. She is a brand new PEN Emerging Voices Fellow, and we'll be starting with them at the end of May, beginning of June. So welcome, Jenise and Janelle. So I wanted to start off with first defining what a chapbook is. Some of our members might not be familiar with exactly what defines a chapbook. Maybe we've heard of it. And I know often there's some maybe different points of view exactly what makes a chapbook. So I'm going to ask each of you for your definition. What is a chapbook and what makes it different than a full-length book or other forms of publication?
So my understanding of a chapbook is that it's like a shorter form, a short book of, I think, any genre. I know that, so like for poetry, it depends. I think the number that I was told or informed was like a book of poetry that's considered full length is like 60 pages or more. But I think it varies, and I'm sure Janelle has more to add and maybe knows like a more formal definition. But that's my understanding of it.
Yeah, I think the cutoff for a chapbook is 40 pages, like in terms of what publishers will consider you having already published a full-length book versus having a chapbook out. I think the other thing I'll say about chapbooks is that what I've come across and what I've learned through this process is also that some chapbooks or some poets choose to come out with chapbooks as a way to explore one specific theme that might not necessarily be a full length worth of poems, but that they can really concentrate on. Or there's also a chapbook as like a project to like prior to a full length. So I know a lot of people approach it differently, but that was kind of how I came to understand what a chapbook really is.
Okay, so which brings me kind of into the next question in developing your chapbooks. So when you started on these poems, did each of you set out to publish, to write a chapbook? And did you have the idea for the chapbook, or were you just writing poems and at some point realized I had a chapbook? So, and both of your books are very place-oriented and definitely tell a compact story. So, Jenise, you can, in your book, you talk, you tell the history of the story. It's almost like a love letter to your hometown of Compton. And Jenise, we get the family history of your family and identity and leading up to your application to be the Marshall Fellow and studying in England. And I love the arrangement of that, which I do want to get into more. But when you started out, did you have these stories in mind that you wanted to tell and say, I'm writing a chapbook? Or did it kind of evolve and become apparent along the way?
Well, for me, like I had been writing poems, and the poems that I was writing, they did kind of fall under, like I would say, two categories. One was my experiences growing up in Compton, and then the other, like my experiences growing up, like within the Panamanian community in Compton or in Los Angeles. So like my family is from Panama, and where we lived, a lot of Panamanian families live there. And so there were, you know, a lot of Panamanian folks who knew each other. And so I had like what I've come to learn is an uncommon experience of like growing up in like a Black Latinx community in Los Angeles. So the poems that I wrote were inspired by like those experiences. And you know, what happened for me, actually, I joined this organization called DSTL Arts. And I'll put a link to the organization in the chat. But DSTL Arts it's a program in LA, it's a nonprofit, and they provide community, you know, poetry and writing workshops. And so taking it back a little bit, like I had my first daughter, and like I, you know, really was dealing with a lot of different things. I had ended up resigning from a position that I was in for many years, like that, my urban planning, like research background. And I had always enjoyed writing, and like writing was like definitely an outlet for me for the experiences that I was going through. And like I was thinking a lot about mothering and motherhood as I was becoming a mother. And so I found these classes. I don't know, I mean, my research, I've been that way from like a kid. Like I always try to figure out like, oh, I want to do something. And so I'll find resources. So I came across DSTL Arts, and they offer these free classes for the community. So I started going there. And, you know, we would have prompts and things like that. And, you know, it really, you know, allowed me to like generate some writing. And so DSTL Arts, I got to know the director, and he had wanted to pilot a artist residency or poet artist in residence at coffee shops. And so I was able to become like the first, you know, poet artist in residence, kind of as a pilot at a coffee shop in Compton. And so a part of that residency was me leading workshops, and then me working on a chapbook specifically. So that's where I really honed and like focused on writing poems for the chapbook. And because I was in Compton, I was inspired by Compton. And also what happened around that time, like I think a month after I started the residency, my mother became ill, like she had a stroke, she became incapacitated. And so I was writing about all of that. And I mean, in the end, I realized like writing about place and growing up in Compton was really also me writing about my mother, because my mother made this place a community for me. So that's how I came about writing a chapbook. So it was actually a part of this program, this residency that I was a part of. And like Janelle was saying, like many times it focuses on the theme, and the theme for me was like writing about place, writing about Compton, and writing about my mother on what it really ended up being about.
Thank you, Janise. And sorry to hear about your mother. And there's a wonderful interview with Janise where you talk more about that, and and I'll find a link for that and put it in at the end of the presentation, but absolutely. So thank you so much. Janelle, did you have a similar journey in your in developing your chapbook?
Yeah, I feel like being here also kind of gave me the opportunity to, or knowing I was going to be speaking about the process, gave me the opportunity to reflect. And I think that I have been performing my poetry since I was a teenager in public places in LA. And I feel like the reason that I wanted a chapbook, wanted to have a chapbook out, was because often when I do readings, people would say like, oh, where can we find your work, right? And that was always like, oh, I don't have something. And I think a lot of poets in LA, especially in like spoken word or like open mic spaces, we'll just put together chapbooks. And I think that's an opportunity for someone who connected with my work to like take a piece of that home with them. And that was really like my motivation for like having the stories out there. I think as far as how it came to be, I think I realized like there were a lot of poems that I had written that I knew resonated with people, and I wanted it to have an audience. And at the same time, I was still kind of crafting like, well, what do I really want this book to be about, right? Like, what do I want the takeaway to be? And because I put it together when I had recently moved to London, I was really thinking about like, what does it mean for me to have had the opportunity to end up here, or to have the access to the opportunities that I do, and what did it take for me to get here? And I think that question for me is a question of, as in the title, right, the lineages that I come from. And so I think that's where I started to compile poems that explored family history, explored migration, explored Salvadoran history and the Civil War, but also that honored and celebrated the ways that family made my journey possible.
Thank you. So both of you, in telling the story of your chapbooks, you talk about also, these stories that you're telling are in a larger context. So Janise, in addition to remembering your childhood and growing up and the importance of this community to you, of Compton to you, there was also this having to deal with the illness of your mother, and how you're working through that and these big changes in your life. And for Janelle, talking about the larger history of your family and extending into Salvadorian history. And so how did you kind of pare it down to these poems for this small form? Were there a lot of poems that were discarded? And any insight or maybe even advice on how do you select those poems and really find that story that would fit in the unique form of a chapbook? And then how did you decide how to put those poems in order?
I can jump in.
Okay.
I feel like I kind of started, and I quite literally printed out every poem I had ever written that I was not embarrassed by. And I laid stuff out on the floor. I feel like visually doing this was really helpful. And I just started to organize things by theme, right? So I had a set of poems that were about family. I had a set of poems that were, like exploring parts of my academic journey. And in having those kind of themes, I was able to kind of see what are the biggest themes in my writing, and how can I then tell a story through these themes. I think it ended up being that I realized like, okay, these family poems are really important. I want to select these. And then I kind of took that like preliminary manuscript and I said, what's missing here, right? Like what part of the story am I not telling? Or what's the emotional tone of these poems? I think it was a lot more intense than I wanted it to be. And so actually a lot of my writing process after was, how do I bring joy into these poems? And honestly, that took writing new poems so that I could balance out the narratives, and tell the story that I actually tell it the way that I wanted to say it.
Interesting. Yeah, that was another part, something else I was curious about. Once you found sort of the story, did that require you to write new poems? And I love the structure of the book, from the family history, that lineage, and then carrying it forward into this real place of joy and support as you venture into new territory and take on this new experience overseas. So I loved that aspect of the book. it's interesting to hear that. Janise, what about your book?
Yeah, so, I knew, or I had already been writing poems, inspired by, my mom. And like, so my mother she was the apartment manager of these buildings, actually the building that's on the cover, excuse me, of the book.
I love that.
The image is done by Mel DePaz. She is an artist from Compton, and no, the buildings actually still exist. So we actually went over there, and I was like, "Oh, can you do something, a rendering?" And I described to her what it was like to live there, where you have these apartments that face each other, and like, literally people would talk to, a lot of the women, the mothers in the community would talk to each other. Folks would hang out, and like you would come down those stairs to play with your friends, and like, so it was this community. And my mother was an apartment manager, and I just, in retrospect, I just am like amazed. I'm like, how did she, how did she even get that position? But because she was an apartment manager, I think that's how a lot of Panamanian families ended up living there. And then there were like Black Panamanian families, and like families whose folks were like from like the South or Southern states. And so I think it was kind of easy. It became easy to write because I was inspired by like this place, and like each apartment really represented something different. So my home, looked a different way, like on Saturday mornings, and I wrote a poem about that. There's an apartment that, was a couple of apartments over where I would go to get my hair braided. So there's a poem about the braider. So this experience of living in this apartment, which was like, they were low income, but probably because of that, like folks were very interdependent, and, and it was a community. And so I could even just, if I thought about every person, and I have a pretty good memory, if I thought about every person who lived in different apartments, like I remember there were a couple of Trinas, who lived there. So there's a poem about all the Trinas, and I was like a popular name. And they all had like, just this way about them. So I think that's what inspired me, and I did begin to like organize it in a way in my journal. So I created, like at the back of my journal, I have like a journal, and at the back of it, I created like my own little spreadsheet where I would put the title, like what the theme was. And even when it was something that I hadn't wrote, and it was just some ideas for me, I put like a note, like this is the ideas that are forming about a poem that feels like it's coming like forth, and I want to write it. And then I would put the page number, so I would have a reference in the journal, like where I was actually drafting and working on that poem, and I put the page numbers at the bottom. So I did, like Janelle said, you kind of create a system because you have to make sense and put everything in an order. But the order was there because of the building, and I could just think about the building, but then I also had to order, like as the poems were coming forth and I was writing, I had to put them in order to keep track of them as well.
Yeah. I love that system, Janise, of putting the page numbers and kind of indexing. It makes me think of bullet journaling. I don't know if anybody knows anything about bullet journaling, but like there's this whole indexing system that happens there. I'm not a bullet journaler, but I've, because I can't quite get that organized. But I like this for using a written journal and poetry, which I've been wanting to do more. So thank you for that. That's fascinating. And I love in your chapbook, when I was making notes about it, I mean, definitely something that I wrote down about it is it's really a celebration of community and care. And you just really talked about that. And the cover definitely, as I got further through the book, that cover became more and more resonant. So I loved that like it sort of came to life as I was reading the book. And I wonder and it's very, there's all the boulevard names, and there's a very strong sense of geography. And I wonder if your urban planning went into that also a little bit, your background in urban planning, maybe. So for both of these books, I guess, the next kind of question I have for both of you about your chapbooks is advice for other people. When will they see they have a chapbook? What happened to the other poems that didn't make it in the chapbook? And are these books, I know, Janelle, in the beginning when you talked about, what is a chapbook, and this idea of a chapbook kind of being, the first step to a full-length book. So are these chapbooks that for you? I could see them being, expanded in many different directions. And generally, well, let's stop there and then we'll move on to the next question. So how does a, a writer out there who might have a chapbook, how do they know if they have a chapbook and they should start working that direction? What happened to the poems that didn't make it in the chapbook? And for you, are these chapbooks, kind of the first step on the way to a full-length manuscript?
I feel like for me, the chapbook in a lot of ways gave me permission to have said, like, here, I have said the thing that I most urgently needed to say at the time. And now I feel like I am finding myself more ready to depart from these stories and explore other things. I don't know whether that means I'm not returning to these poems. I sincerely doubt that. But I think that the next step for me definitely is like exploring other themes and exploring other aspects of craft and of my writing, to kind of see where that will go. I feel like there was a lot in this book that felt very dire, like very urgent, like, and also because these were big questions I was asking in terms of origin, in terms of family history, and the process of like interviewing and researching and discussing things with people was very formative for me as a person and as a writer. And so I feel like my advice to anyone who would want to put a chapbook together is like, what is the story that you most urgently need to tell? And urgent doesn't need to be this big serious thing. It's just like, what are you being called to share? And how can telling that story free you?
I love that. Jenise?
Yes.
Do you have a, did you want to add anything to that, or any advice on putting together a chapbook or moving towards a full-length version of the Blvd?
Okay, can you all hear me? Because I got stalled for a second.
Oh, we can hear you. Yeah,
Okay.
did you? Okay.
Okay, great. I was like, oh no.
No worries, no worries.
Well, where I am is, so I mean, when I started also with the chapbook, I should mention that like Compton has such a huge place identity already. Like a lot of people have heard of it. For those of us who are from here or live here, and those who are not, I mean, there's still like works being, like there's a Netflix, Prime show that's based in Compton. And so it's this place that is like, kind of stays like in popular culture. And so in writing about it, like I knew, like I just wanted to add a story, like add a narrative to these narratives that were already there, knowing that like I'm not necessarily representative, but I do represent. And what the chapbook allowed me to do was to explore what this city means to me. And kind of what came from that is like writing a chapbook that was about growing up and being a young girl in Compton, which, a lot of times stories that are told about Compton don't represent like this perspective of like women and girls, like especially like if we talk about rap music, it's a particular experience. In that sense, like what the chapbook allowed me to do was to explore like something very specific from that specific angle. And so there were a lot of poems that did fall by the wayside that actually, they just didn't fit. They didn't fit the story that was coming together. And even now as I write, there are some poems that like a poem wasn't actually the proper container for it. So I'm in this space where I'm actually writing more essays, where like the chapbook was like a beginning place. And now like there's more that I have to say and more that I want to bring in. And I'm actually like writing essays, even though it's still about that place. I feel like I probably could write more poems if I went into like every apartment in the building. I probably could. But, I also want to, respect and honor the space that I was in when I created that work in that chapbook. So I don't know, did I get to the question or maybe in
Oh yeah. Yeah, I think so. And, the questions are just, prompts for us to explore a little more deeply how we put together chapbooks and why, why the chapbook. And so I do want to talk a little bit about the difference between like a full-length book and a chapbook and the time to put it together. Janelle, you talked about the chapbook, like, this was a story, a sense of urgency. So could you talk a little bit about the process of once you had the chapbook done, of submitting the chapbook, the kind of the timeline maybe between finishing and publishing? How did you choose your particular publishers? I know Distill Arts for you, Jenise, you were doing the residency. Was the chapbook automatically a part of the residency, or was that, something that you had to submit separately? And any, favorite chapbook publishers or any other advice about, once you have the chapbook, how do we get it? How do we match it to a publisher?
Yeah, so I began looking at chapbook contests a couple years ago, and I had a running list of like, these are some places that I'm interested in. One was Platypus Press, which is based in the UK, and I submitted to their like online journal, which is called Wildness, and it's one of my favorite journals. So I thought, oh, it'd be wonderful to work with those editors. And I had I wasn't seriously thinking about submitting my work yet. I was just kind of gathering places. But at the time I was submitting a lot of work to journals and anthologies. And I feel like I was very fortunate in that I submitted to the Breakbeat Poets Latinx at Haymarket. And it was through that submission that the editors reached out to me and asked, are you working on a chapbook? And so I think that on that, it was kind of the pressure of like, well, here's this opportunity, right? And I wasn't planning to submit anything for at least another year. But I said, I don't have something now, but I could have it to you by like, whatever date. And so I feel like I was able to kind of use that as a way to like get past the imposter syndrome or get past the insecurities of like, I don't know if I'm ready to do this. It was like, I can't turn this down. I also really love Haymarket as a press that like has very progressive politics and works to uplift a lot of voices of marginalized writers. And so I really wanted to move forward with that. And I was like, I gotta put in the work now.
Yeah, well, I never would have guessed that was the story behind your chapbook and that you felt pressured to get it done. It feels so, like such a complete collection and so you did the work and you, succeeded. It's a beautiful book. So thank you. Jenise, did you have anything more to add to your publication process? Also in this question, I'm curious, like, once you sent it to the publisher, was there a lot of editing that they did? So was there a kind of a working relationship with the editors in the chapbook? So, but Janise or Janelle, I don't know if you wanted to add to that.
So for me, the Chapbook was a part of the residency by the end of the residency. And it was a pilot. I mean, it worked out to also be able to help the organization, figure out what worked and what wasn't working with this program. So one of the things we found out is that, we actually needed more time. Initially it was a particular time frame, and then it took longer. And so the director realized that, for a chapbook for an artist or poet, that he would need to expand the time. And so so the way that I worked with the publisher is I would actually, I was working on poems like every week, and we had we would meet every week, like at the coffee shop. I would have workshops, but I would also meet with, the publisher was also the editor and my mentor. And so that's how it wasn't like one collection that I said. So the Distill Arts also does publish chapbooks, and I think that is a benefit of them. Like Janelle had mentioned, sometimes when you go to poetry readings or you're at a poetry reading, the audience, folks are very generous. Like, hey, how can I support your work? Do you have something? You have a book? And Distill Arts does provide a service of, publishing the book. And them publishing the book. Now you have a book that you can take to readings. And I think maybe the difference between like a larger publisher and like a publisher like Distill Arts is there's not necessarily a name or like marketing behind it already. It's really you taking your book and, participating in readings and things like that. And so, so my chapbook was a part of this residency, but Distill Arts has actually published other folks' chapbooks as well that are not a part of the residency.
Right. Okay. And you froze a little bit in there. I don't think we missed too much. You were kind of saying how it was you didn't like submit a collection to Distill Arts. It was a working it was a progress, a partnership through the residency with the editor and publisher. Did we miss something in there? Okay. You froze for like a second, and just want to make sure we didn't miss anything in there. Thank you. What interesting stories and unusual stories. And I think that's just a good reminder how, every book, every publication has its really own unique story. You never really know what one thing is going to lead to, and submitting to that anthology led to the chapbook. And so really keeping all those options open. Were the poems in your book, in the chapbooks, were they, a lot of them previously published before, or were they just all in the book? I think Janelle, if I remember correctly, a lot of yours were published individually. Janise, I think yours was more in the collection, a few were published individually, but do you want to, is there anything you want to add about that? Is that important to have the poems previously published before the chapbook, or is it okay just to have a chapbook with all new poems?
Yeah, I feel like, one, I want to thank women who submit for encouraging me to start publishing and sending out my work. I think the first piece that I had submitted and gotten accepted was like a few months after I'd gone to the Women Who Submit orientation. And I think what I will say about sending work out is that it allows you to build an audience for your work, right? It allows you to have a place to turn when it's like, oh, like, I love that work, can I find more of your work, right? And linking to those places where I feel like that has helped me a lot, in the sense that by the time my chapbook came out, I think there were already people who were like, I've read a poem here or there of yours, I like your work, I'd be interested in buying your chapbook, right? And so I think there's also a community that is formed through that process of submitting, or even like people who people who I was published alongside, right? Like in anthologies or journals, it's like I start to kind of build those friendships or relationships with people where I want to support their work and they want to support mine. I think that to me is really the important aspect of submitting. I think submitting, also getting into that practice of submitting, also taught me to not be afraid of putting my work out there. And it was so affirming to have people respond positively to my work. I was thinking today that the way that the world worked out with the pandemic and everything, if this opportunity hadn't come to me the way that it did, I don't know that I would have submitted anything even to this day, right? But I feel like I have the good fortune of knowing that one, things didn't work out that way, but now I think I have the affirmation to kind of keep going.
Absolutely. Janise, did we lose you? You kind of popped out of my
I'm here.
screen. Okay, great. Okay, there you are.
Yeah,
I couldn't see you in my screen.
It was something, so I transitioned to something else real quick.
Okay.
So yeah, it's interesting because I don't think I really knew what I was doing, to be honest. Like, look, I don't have any blurbs. That's like what I even look back, like, was I supposed to get blurbs from people? It's just on the back of the book is just my summary and vibes, pretty much. So yeah, I submitted to a couple of places, and I didn't even know, like, I submitted to the Acentos Review, like, one poem, and then I got connected with another poet, a local poet, Mike the Poet, and he invited me to submit. He was like, oh, submit to Cultural Weekly. So I submitted there. So I didn't know, like, the process. I think I learned afterwards, like, oh, I guess people do submit poems that they then later publish because it's like a appetizer, it's like a teaser to what's to come. Like, oh, okay, this is why people blur books. And like, there were even some folks who were like, oh, you should have just asked me. And I was like, well, I didn't even know how that worked. So I do appreciate, like, just learning as I went along. And then I have this book that has no blurbs, and and a lot of the poems weren't published in other publications. So if anything, it's possible. It's possible to publish Chapbook with no blurbs and where no poems or minimal poems were published someplace else. So maybe that's the takeaway of what I.
Yeah, my chapbook had no blurbs either, so I'm with you there, Janise. no blurbs. I really love the form of the chapbook. I feel like it's one that we don't read and review enough, and I think both your books are excellent example of how this concise form, and I want to go back to that sense of urgency in a chapbook, maybe sometimes, or conciseness, and really getting that snapshot. In both the books, I felt really drawn into this world, and it felt very complete. And I think some of that is because of the shortness of the chapbook. So I could have a lot more questions about that, but I want to check in with Lauren and the chat. Should we start transitioning to, are there a lot of questions in the chat that we want to address from the audience?
Yeah, I think that would be a good idea. We can go into Q&A now if we're ready. So we have a question in the chat from Julia Park Tracy. Julia, would you like to unmute yourself and ask the question?
Hi.
Hi.
Hi. Yeah, I wasn't expecting to, have to be public, but anyway.
Oh, yeah, you don't have to be.
No, it's okay. I'm like, well, here I am. So anyway, yeah, I'm just wondering about what's the legitimacy or the, thought on self-publishing a chapbook to have at readings and what have you. I mean, I've been getting self-published for a long time, but I don't have a chapbook, and I was like do I need to go through all these contests? Do I need to submit everywhere? Or could I just print up 12 poems in a little booklet? And is that legit or whatever? You know, I don't really know what legitimate means anyway, but what do you guys think about all that? What do you think? Dead silence.
Janelle and
Excellent.
Jenise. I was referring to you. And actually that was kind of one of my questions, was about, you know, the not just self-publishing, but in general, sort of the legitimacy, particularly for people who are seeking work in academia. You know, kind of that legitimacy question about chapbook versus full-length book, and I think self-publishing. So Jenise and Janelle.
Yeah, I feel like this also, I think what this question makes me think of is who the audience, who your ideal audience is, and kind of thinking, I think that there's nothing, I don't know, I've seen a lot and supported a lot of self-published chapbooks, and I think that's been a really great way for me to feel connected to a writer who I've met at a reading, or, you know, heard or anything like that. But I think the way that I approached making that decision was knowing that publishing with a press was going to give me a bigger audience, and was going to make my book more accessible in the sense of like being able to like purchase it online. I also was really intimidated by like having to print it myself and like deal with a lot of that, right? So I think that was my hesitation, but I don't think that there was anything necessarily like wrong with, like, I think that it's a great option. Something I did do for readings was like I would print postcards that had a poem or two on them. And that was something that was really important to me as a way of like connecting with audiences. But yeah, I don't know, Jenise, if you have thoughts there too.
Well, so Distill Arts, like the director and the editor, he also has graphic design experience. So, he helped to design the book. So I think it did, the books that come out of Distill Arts, they do look, I would say, maybe like polished, because he does provide like some graphic design aspect of it. I mean, the chapbook is having it has been helpful, in terms of having something. And I feel like there have been opportunities that have come up through this chapbook. And, for instance, I mean, and in some ways that just like, it's just like once you have it, like then like some doors start opening or things start happening. Like for example, so I was recently featured in LA Times along with several other poets, and so I had the chapbook. I got encouragement to actually do like a book launch, because I was like, I don't know, so I did it, and I did it at practically a coffee shop in Compton. It was very important to do it in Compton. And it turns out that the person who wrote that article, she came to the book launch because she said someone had told her about it. It's in the community, it's local. And like that made me feel really good that I'm doing something that's in my community, literally down the street from my home. And it's, opening up a space, and provides a space that people, want to, come to and contribute to. And I mean, I could not have planned that other than having a chapbook and then deciding, oh, I want to do a book launch in my community. So that opportunity opened up doors, like, other opportunities. And that's pretty much, I think, how it happens in terms of, I mean, legitimacy, like I kind of have grappled with that too, but I'm sorry, my little one's coming. But it is nice to just have it. I like the idea of having a chapbook that, I'm interested in actually exploring more chapbooks, or exploring the use of a chapbook in terms of like exploring different themes, and like, even getting more artistic, like with the chapbook. I'm interested in actually exploring it even more. So that's what I connect.
Yeah, I'd like, oh, go ahead.
Oh no,
More
go ahead.
questions?
Yeah, we
Oh, I
have.
was just gonna say, I like the idea, like, I do think that the chapbook invites maybe some experimentation outside your normal, your comfort zone and that sort of thing. But I know we have a lot more questions, so.
We have a question from Noriko Nakata. How do you know when it's a chapbook versus a full-length collection?
Hi, Ms. Nakata. Ms. Nakata was my middle school journalism teacher, so I feel so excited. Anyway, I feel like I approach this. I think I'm coming into writing also with a lot of like self-doubt and like trying to like find my place and find my footing. And one important thing that someone told me was like, let the chapbook be something you learn from about what it is to like put a book together. And I think that for me, it was really important to have that, where like I'm so putting together a full-length collection is so daunting to me that I was like, a chapbook is like a mini version of that. So it's not going, like I feel like now I've learned so much from this process that I can kind of go on and work on a full length after this. So that is what I am, or that's kind of how I approach that question. I think that in terms of like content, there's definitely a lot that I didn't get to say in this chapbook that I want to delve into. And I think had I more confidence or more, I don't know. I feel like I might have worked on like expanding that more until full length. But for me, the chapbook was a good way of like getting over the fear of putting a book into the world.
I don't have much to add to that. I will say something I remembered. A chapbook, it felt like just a start, just a beginning. I remember seeing something like on social media, like the poet Jenise Smith. They said that they like chapbooks because, or something like, they like chapbooks because it shows the arc of a writer. It shows where you started, and like the idea you get to another destination in your writing, and the chapbook was just the beginning. You can do another chapbook like in the future, but I like that idea that it's a start, and like your writing changes over time, and that chapbook exists to show you like where you were, and even as Janelle is saying, like learning and like how you've grown in like your writing. Yeah.
It looks like we have a question that Kelly McIver would like to ask. If you'd like, go ahead.
It's for Jenise, and then actually I want to cheat, and I've got a short one for Janelle. Jenise, something Lisa had led to briefly, she talked about your urban planning background, and did it have influence on your pieces that you wrote for your Boulevard chapbook? And then just to chase her on Janelle on the postcards, did you hand those out for free or you sold them? But Jenise, you first, please.
Yes, I would say it did have some influence. So my experiences in urban planning was research, and I did GIS mapping. And I actually saw someone, Saba, that I used to work with here, and I was all about GIS mapping, and so I got the idea that I wanted to explore that with the writing, and so there are some maps in the book. And but I really wanted to go further, just the time frame of like the residency, I didn't have time to, like, I wanted to actually map the poems. So there's a group of poems, like very short poems, like in the middle of the book, and they correspond to like streets, like on Wardlow. And I actually have addresses for those poems. And so my idea, I wanted to actually, I wanted to like actually map those poems. And there's a poem that's right before them, and I called it the map's legend. So my idea was that this poem is going to be the legend, and then these short poems are going to be points on the map. And it was a time where my family was moving around a lot. So I was like, oh, it kind of will convey like the idea of migration, and like even as like, you know, daughter of immigrants, like how just moving around so much was kind of chaotic. But I, you know, I didn't get to capture that in the chapbook. But so that's, I mean, if there's something else that I wanted to do, it was that. But yeah, I was getting kind of intense with like the urban planning and like the mapping and the poems. And it's like, okay, well, let me just do this. Let me just publish something. So it's definitely there. And definitely something that I still think about, like place is definitely resonant in my language.
Well, and I also just went on that, that could be something that could lead your audience to your website, or you could offer, you know, I've got some addresses that connect back. No pressure. I'm just saying that, you know. Cool.
I have a story map that I have created. I just haven't shared it, but maybe I'll put a link. You all could tell me what you think about it. It's just like the Knight Foundation has like the story map. Because the thing about like, so because I did mapping, like I want to do the mapping myself. I want to do it, not just use like a platform that you just drop a point on. So that's just my details that I want to do. So, but I'll share it with y'all. Y'all can let me know what you think about it.
I love this idea of a interactive digital chapbook, Janise. I think you can develop a whole new form there. That sounds fantastic. Are there any other questions in the chat, or anybody else who maybe didn't post a question yet? If you would like to raise your hand, if you have a question, we have a few more minutes.
It looks like we just got a message from Cynthia. Cynthia asked, Janelle, could you tell us what message instruction you received on publication, chapbook, or full collection you received from your MA in creative writing and education from Goldsmiths University of London?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I also want to tell Kelly real quick. I did. I would ask for.
Oh, sorry.
I would ask for like $2 donations for postcards, just in terms of like the printing. But if there was a case where like I just wanted someone to have the work, I would just give out a postcard. Just kind of depended on that. In terms of Cynthia's question, so I was actually putting together the chapbook and writing like portfolio for my master's at the same time. So they were like two different sets of poems. I think it was helpful. It was also during the pandemic. So it was just like a lot going on at once. I think that what was helpful about creating new work while also revising and compiling past work was that I think that like my writing has grown and shifted a lot from what is published in the chapbook. And that allowed me to kind of revise with a new eye, right? To make work more concise, or to kind of see it a little bit differently. So I think it was really helpful to me to like be creating new work and kind of getting feedback from my advisor on that, while also kind of putting a manuscript together.
Fantastic. I think, thank you. And I'm sorry I forgot the postcard question and kind of skipped over that. So sorry. I think we're at the end of our time. Is that correct, Lauren?
I think we are, yes.
So I want to thank Women Who Submit for letting me talk about chapbooks, and for helping me with all of my work, as Janelle and Janise also said. I owe so much to Women Who Submit, and thank you, and thank you for this opportunity.
And thank you.
And thank you. Oh, and our panelists, of course.
Yes, thank you so much to our panelists and our moderator, Janelle Pineda, Jenise Miller and Lisa Cheby. So we've got a couple housekeeping things. Please help us with future planning by filling out this short feedback form. We made a Google form. I'm going to put the link in the chat right now. You can help us with future workshop planning. Now we're going to be taking a 10-minute break. When we return, new members will be moved to a breakout room for an orientation with Sakaya Manning, and current members are invited to stay in this space with Sibel Garcia Cole for sharing goals and co-working. If you are new to Women Who Submit, please help us create the breakout room by using the rename feature in Zoom to place an N before your name. I'm going to put a directions slide and share my screen. We also have many upcoming opportunities, and for more information about those, I'm going to put the link in the chat right here. And now I'm going to share my screen.